when you're managing that project, you have to know your numbers. You might have to pivot to a different trade partner. You need to know what your numbers are on labor so that you can negotiate a new partner to come in. So yeah, you really have to have not just, knowledge of the numbers, but you have to want to understand what they are.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Pro Talk podcast, a regular discussion with building industry professionals. This is Fine Homebuilding Contributor and Production Manager at TDS Custom Construction, Ian Schwandt. Today, I'm joined by Dan Purnell, Production Manager at Alloy Workshop in Charlottesville, Virginia. You can find the Fine Homebuilding Pro Talk podcast and the original Fine Homebuilding podcast at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. You can leave feedback and ask questions there too. Dan, thanks for joining me today.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Can you give us a little bit of background on what Alloy Workshop does and what your role is at Alloy?
Yeah. So we're a design build company, have been in business since 2007. I've been with the company for just over 2 years now. Started in an estimating role and have moved into the production manager role within the last 6 to 8 months. We focus on mostly renovation work, about 90% renovation. We'll do about one new build a year, and just work with our clients starting to design into construction.
So what was it that brought you to Alloy? Did you start off, you said you started off as an estimator. What was that position like for you to come into there? Yeah,
so it was really giving me a background of the industry. I have had no industry experience prior to coming on with Alloy, except for what I was doing on my own home as I was kicking the tires and learning how to do things. And I knew Zach Snyder, who is one of the partners of Alloy and handles the construction side of the business, and we were good personal friends. And I'd been in Charlottesville for 5 years now, at the time for 3 years, and so had gotten to know Zach pretty well, and saw an ad on Instagram, actually, that basically was advertising for an estimator. And I was coming from some director level positions within other companies and had always wanted to get into this industry, and so just reached out to Zach and said, hey, I'm interested, and what would this look like? And over the course of several months during COVID, when we all didn't know what was going to happen, we kind of worked out a plan to get me on board.
So you started, though, as the role called a project developer, right? Can you talk a little bit about what that role is? It's the same role that I started out in here at TDS, and I definitely came to it as well from like the estimating background, but I had experience in the building trades. But I think it's a role that a lot of people don't have at their companies or don't really understand what it does. Yeah,
I think that's true for Alloy as well. So when I came on board, Zach was handling everything from start to finish in construction, outside of having project managers perform the work. And so they were growing and needed somebody to focus on estimating, handling trade partners, getting bids for projects, organizing all that work into scope writing and specification writing, selections building, the entire process of the numbers behind the scene. They didn't have anybody. And as they were growing, it just got harder to do with one person in the office who was also an owner and had to focus on, the ownership side of the business. So I came in and just took over that estimating piece, and just develop those projects from start to finish and through construction as well, just kind of keeping an eye on where they were, how we were doing on budget, learning from, some things you might have missed in an estimate, all those types of things.
And Alloy is very architectural design focused, right? And in the design build portion of the business. So what was it like being kind of a numbers guy and then having to work with some of the more ephemeral parts of the design and getting that to follow through into the built environment?
Yeah, that's always, the biggest challenge is kind of aligning the construction estimate with what the architects are, drawing. And it's there's a push and a pull there. It's, Customer says we want to spend 300. Architect designs something, we estimated it's 400, and then we have a lot of talking to do in a room to figure out how we're going to get to that 300. So we actually have spent the better part of the last year and a half probably really dialing in that process of making sure that what we're designing is in check with what the customer is looking for. And we do that by bringing estimating in really early in the design process to put kind of our fingerprints on what we think the project is going to cost. And then, spot check that throughout the process, actually many times, just to make sure that we come in on budget or have a really good, record of why we're, over budget if we happen to be.
I've found in my experience here that the budget can move in really surprising ways, and it's sometimes difficult to predict what discussion that a design team or even just the project clients might be having, that then by the time it gets to you as the estimator, you're like, whoa, this is totally different than what I looked at before. So what are some of those other steps where that role is making sure that they're doing the checks on the estimate through the process?
Yeah, so we were brought into the design meetings early on, and then at 50% and 75%. And so we have currently we're co-construct users, and so we have a parameter estimate that we can run through co-construct for all of our projects, which helps us give a good idea of what that project might cost. Then we'll start sending out some trade partner bids to validate some of those things that we're predicting. And we're always looking pretty deeply in on design details, talking with the designers, and designers in general, can be surprised, like homeowners, like, wow, I didn't realize that cost that much, So we're trying to inform and educate, everyone as a team. And that's kind of the beauty of being design build, is everybody's in the same, office, and it's easy to have those conversations versus trying to, wrestle with that with an outside organization.
And now, having moved from that pre-construction kind of world into the production manager role, did that give you a good foundation to build on in the production manager role? And how do these roles differ in your relationship to the project?
Yeah, there's really, I don't think you could do it any other way unless you came from, for me anyway, not having the industry experience, I needed to start in the weeds and understand that process, from start to finish. So that was extremely helpful. You gain a lot of confidence working through the numbers for a couple years. So the biggest difference is, now I oversee project managers and I oversee the project budgets, timelines, grippage and slippage on gross margin, grippage and slippage on schedule. I'm constantly kind of looking at the bigger picture of the project, not kind of focused on the number side. So when I made this shift, or prior to making this shift, we hired somebody to do the estimating so they could take over my responsibility. And then I took over the balance of what Zach was handling, when I was an estimator.
What is your role with the project managers? You're managing a team and then they're managing subcontractors to execute the project, or are they managing any in-house tradespeople as well?
Yeah, right now we sub out most of our work. So the project managers are managing the trade partner relationships on site at each of our projects. And my role is to just communicate with the homeowner and the project manager to make sure that we're on schedule, on budget, communicate any kind of changes we see along the way, whether it's a change order or something that we need to figure out on the design side. So I'm doing site visits every week at our projects, meeting with the project managers, having weekly production meetings with our project managers so that we're all on the same page for projects, and just basically talking about your project every single day to make sure you know where they are and what the next milestone is, and invoices and all those things that go along with projects, just making sure it stays on track.
You mentioned coming to the role from some director level positions at other companies. Were there specific things in your background that geared you toward being able to build teams and plan these projects out, as opposed to, I think many people in our role tend to be very reactionary and just kind of wait for a series of bad things to happen and then figure out what to do with it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think one of the strengths for coming from outside the industry was, I didn't come from having a tool belt on where you're focused on the next thing that has to be done on the project. I came from managing teams, and my previous career was with Utz potato chips for 10 years. And, it sounds kind of funny that this guy that used to, go out and sell potato chips and work with customers and things is now, in this industry. But, a lot of that stuff actually translates over incredibly well. And, a couple of things. One, in sales, you have to deal with clients and you have to make sure they're happy and you have to make sure their expectations are met. That's always been a strength just from having a pretty big sales background. And then additionally, when the last 3 years I was with Utz, I actually went over to the data side of the business and I was handling all their pricing and promotions. So basically I was loading in, item numbers, prices. I was looking at gross margin on those projects or products. It's very much the same. I mean, a 2x4 versus a bag of potato chips, there's not a whole lot of difference outside of what it costs. So it really did translate pretty well when I came over here.
So when you came back into the office role, did you quickly see how the work in progress document translates into that sales data and things that you were inputting with Utz?
Yeah, it kind of came full circle at that point. So in the sales process, you don't really realize what's going on in the background. When I went to the data side of the business, it finally a big light bulb went off where you're like, oh, okay, somebody actually is putting all this information in there. It's then getting downloaded to these handhelds, which then get out to the sales field. And so that was definitely an epiphany, of seeing that kind of full circle in that industry.
Sure. And then to come into the office and getting that understanding of you have your material package, and then you have your labor and subcontracted labor and all the different parts that go into a remodeling project, especially an architecturally driven one.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you're managing that project and managing those project managers, you have to know your numbers. You have to know what you're working with. Things change. You might have a trade partner that isn't available, and then all of a sudden you have to, pivot to a different trade partner. You need to know what your numbers are on labor so that you can negotiate, a new partner to come in. So, yeah, you really have to have not just, knowledge of the numbers, but you have to want to understand what they are. And I've always been, pretty dialed in on the budget side of things personally and professionally. So this was a pretty easy transition.
Did you come into some pretty ingrained systems that Zach had in place at Alloy, or did you have to develop certain parts of this as you went along?
Yeah, no, Zach is a systems and process guy through and through.
That was a loaded question.
Yeah, you know that. And so, that's one of the things that actually attracted me to the business. I knew about Alloy and Zach, prior to interviewing, but when I got in and started understanding that, this small company of 14, employees was run honestly, in some ways better than the larger companies I had worked for. I knew that it was a place I wanted to be, because anybody that takes that kind of time to build those systems and processes, they're going to be successful. It was very buttoned up when I got here. We've made a lot of improvements since then. They definitely had systems and processes in place.
Since you guys are architecturally driven and then you do, build the project in a design build manner, talk us through the whole process of what a client would go through when they contact Alloy through to finishing a project.
Yeah, so our leads come in, and then our office manager reaches out to that lead, and we have a specific amount of questions we ask and try and gauge whether we think it's a lead that's worth, our time to qualify and see if it's a good fit for us. Once we decide that it is, then we'll have Dan Zimmerman, the other owner of the company on the architecture side, is the salesperson. He'll go out and meet with the client, discuss the project. And at that point, we'll put a schematic design contract in place. If they move forward with that, it's a 3-month process, somewhere in that, realm, depending on size of the project, to get the first schematic design in front of the client. And once they agree to that, we would then move to design development, which we then further scope out exactly what we're going to do in that project. And during that time, estimating is working in the background, building out the estimate, the schedule, all those things that go along with it, until we get to a construction contract. And then we just move forward into construction at that point.
Do you guys typically try and stack up a backlog of these jobs so that you can kind of pick and choose which ones fit best inside your schedule?
Yeah, we try our best to have a good backlog. And, in the last 2 years, that's actually been a nice luxury to have enough business to have backlog available. And we do tend to pull things through as they do fit in our schedule. With some of the economic changes we've been seeing over the last few months, the backlog's not as robust as it usually is, but definitely still have projects that are waiting to go. We try and we do a lot with alignment on not just what fits in our schedule, but what fits with each project manager. I think we're very conscious of personalities and customer personalities and who works best in each of those areas.
Does your project management team have variety of skill sets? Or maybe one is better on certain remodels and one has a better track record on new construction builds? You mentioned that you do one of those a year.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. We do know kind of what the strengths are for each of our project managers, and we've got one person that likes commercial work. So if we have a commercial job, then we'll definitely plug them in on that. And we've got another project manager that's super great with just like communication and the details of communication. And so we will align them with clients that we see early on in the design process or very in the weeds on projects and communication. So we look at those different things and make sure that we align them correctly.
So through the building an estimate as part of this process, are you shooting for a fixed price contract in the end to build?
We are. We've since I've been here, just shy of 3 years, everything has been fixed price with the exception of one large project we're on now, which is we're doing time and materials. So we're very comfortable working on fixed price. It definitely is a good selling point for us with our clients.
Yeah, it's very much the same thing for us here. What are some of the challenges that you have in managing these projects, especially if there's a long lag time between when it completes design to when you start?
Yeah, we ran into that during COVID with the massive price increases that we were seeing, and with a big backlog, and then COVID hitting with price increases. That was kind of the perfect storm of estimating maybe 6 to 9 months before you start a project, and then you're like, oh my gosh, what's happened? So we learned from that. We put a price escalation clause in our contract. So that's definitely helped have those conversations with the clients if we see that huge shift again. But really, when you're working with fixed contracts, what I've found in my experience is that it really starts in estimating early on. You have to make sure that you know what the scope of work is. You have to make sure all your costs are covered, your trade partners are brought into the process, and just make sure you look at it 3 or 4 times before you put that contract in front of the customer to make sure everything's dialed in. And then the only other thing that's really important on fixed contract, and really with any contract, is just change orders throughout the process. You just have to make sure you know what your scope of work is, and if any scope creep happens, you have to capture that as a change order to make sure that you're not assuming it's under the fixed contract.
Is that a challenge for you as the production manager when you have some multiple teams of project managers with mostly subcontracted work under them? Do you find that it's kind of difficult to keep people from just doing the work because they're in the go mode on the job?
Yeah, that's always a challenge, I think, for all of us. And we just had a production meeting yesterday and realized that there was a aspect of the project that we should not have paid for. But it was too late for us to go back to the client because it's, water under the bridge at that point. It just wouldn't be right to approach them 3 months after we performed it. And it wasn't huge, but it was just a good lesson to remember that, we need to talk with our trade partners often that, hey, if any of this work falls outside of your contract that you're working under with us, let us know so that we can ask the client if they want to move forward with it, or if it's something that we missed, we know about it up front.
Yeah, I've found that recently with mechanical contractors, sometimes they'll take the path of least resistance or the mechanic's preferred path when thinking about it more dynamically and involving the whole team. You might be able to find a $1,000 solution to a $5,000 problem. Whereas if you just make it the $5,000 problem and you find out about it a month later, how do you recoup that cost, right?
Yeah, and that's always the challenge. And that's kind of where, our purchase orders come in with our trade partners, making sure we have a clear purchase order for an amount and scope of work. And if anything falls outside of that, we need to know, as early as possible.
What are you doing with your project managers to make sure that they understand not just the scope of work of the project, but also the design intent? I think sometimes if you're the person in the field and you're not clear on that design intent and you have people coming in and critiquing the way something turned out, you can get wrapped up in wanting to correct it to make sure that you meet that intent.
Yeah, we involve them. I talked earlier about having estimating involved, or our project managers are actually in on that as well. So when we get to the 50% mark on a design, project managers are brought in just to start having the conversations internally about what they're seeing on the project, how we're going to perform certain scopes of that project. We tell them at that point, obviously, what the budget is. So they can get a good sense of kind of what they're working with, because these guys out in the field obviously have a pretty good grasp on budgets and things like that. So they're brought into that design process really early, so they know what the design intent is, just from constant communication with the designers. So we've got a great team that's been there for a long time, and we work really well with our design department. So it makes it far easier.
It's a lot easier to have that department inside the same company structure as opposed to maybe working with an architect who might be working with a different interior designer, and then you have different people in the field, right?
Yeah, we had one of those projects last year, actually, with an outside architect, outside interior designer, and definitely was more challenging. And we definitely saw some gross margin slippage on that project because you just don't have the control over it that you usually do. So, learning lesson, and you just got to understand that it's probably going to take a little bit more time when it's not all in-house.
And it gets outside your typical delivery method, right? Like
That's
even
right.
Your project managers probably get used to working with certain certain people in your design department, and vice versa, right? Where they can start to get used to the way that person works and their workflow to make sure that they're fitting in with what they know that person has done successfully in the past.
Yeah, it's really interesting. The ones that we've done with outside architects, I've noticed that project managers, we didn't really realize this until it happened, but they continue to work through architectural issues because that's what we're used to doing as a team. But when you have an outside architect, you really shouldn't be doing that. It should be on the architect. And so it's such a habit-driven environment that they're in. So it's like no fault of anybody's that we were doing that, but we realized that, going forward, if we work with outside architects, we have to be very, very conscious to not get, too embedded in our habits of figuring out architectural issues when they should really be doing that for us. It's just very foreign to us because we're used to just jumping in and doing it.
I noticed on the website you guys have a lot of ADUs on there that you've completed, and I know Charlottesville is a college town.
Yeah.
And it's become a way to get more density in some of these older college towns like Madison or Charlottesville. Is there any specific type of project that's really in your wheelhouse? And additionally, how successful have you guys been in becoming someone who's a go-to contractor for producing these ADUs, which I've found can be kind of a difficult sell sometimes for the amount of money that ends up needing to be put into producing something that meets somebody's desire or vision.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's funny that you brought up the ADU because, honestly, since I've been here for 2.5 years, we were wrapping one up when I got here and we haven't done one since. So it's, like you said, ADUs can be quite expensive because you got to start from the ground up. And by the time you wrap all that up and, we're full service design build, there's costs associated with that. So I think we've seen the challenge there. But I think to answer your question on what we're really good at, I think we're good at solving problems for clients. We're not good at coming in and just refreshing a kitchen with new cabinets. It's just not, it's not a good use of our time. It's probably not a good use of the client's money. But if they come to us and say, hey, we need a new kitchen and we need to reimagine the flow of this house, and we also would like to have a bigger bedroom, so maybe an addition back here. That's what we're really good at, because then we can go to design, we can solve their pain point, their problems, and it just makes the relationship with the client so much better than just coming down to the price of a kitchen.
Yeah, it gives a lot more range to spread out those costs, and
that's right.
Not just the costs alone, but the amount of effort that goes into it, right? Because you have not just the project managers and yourself, but you also have somebody estimating it multiple times, and then you have all the design time that it takes to solve those problems. Like you said, reimagining the flow of a house is very different than just going to your kitchen or bath place and doing a refresh, right?
Yeah, exactly. And, we have identified too that, working with clients that, 2-income clients, busy professionals is really another great fit for us. We've realized that, people that maybe aren't in that position don't necessarily value what we bring to the table. And then it becomes, maybe they just do need to work with that contractor that's going to come in and just freshen everything up and leave. It's just, there's multiple things to look at, but we've found that kind of solving problems for people are what we're good at.
I've started to think of it as, wanting to work for people who are hiring you for your expertise and not hiring you to do. That's
right. And that's exactly what we've got written is people that value our expertise. And so, you learn that the hard way, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. You learn that by working for a few people who show up with a complete set of construction documents that they produced and are just like, give me a price for this project and go do it for me. Because
that's right.
I saw one on your website that looked like what I think it should look like in the end.
Yeah.
What challenges do you see for this type of industry that we're both in, this reimagining existing homes and architectural design build?
Yeah, the thing I've seen recently is really just wrestling with the interest rates right now. I mean, we've seen a couple projects that, it's really interesting when you've got people that probably refinanced a couple years ago at the lowest rates, seen ever, 2.5%, 3%. And now 2 years later, they're like, hey, we want to put this addition on there, but they can't reopen that mortgage because it's at 7%, 6.5%. Like, we literally just had this conversation with a client who was all in, ready to do this, but how are they going to crack open their 15-year mortgage at 2.9%, turn it into a 30-year at 7%? It just doesn't make sense mathematically. So we've noticed a pinch there. And I think that's going to be a challenge going forward. I think that's probably why maybe some of our backlog has, a little lighter than it has been in the past. But, Charlottesville is an interesting area. There's plenty of people here that can self-finance. So that's, we're fortunate in that respect. So I don't think it'll be a huge impact on us, but we have had those conversations with clients. And I think that's going to be a challenge going forward, just because people are used to having a lot of flexibility with mortgages and financing.
You see any challenges for you in a smaller metro area with trade partners and the availability of tradespeople to do the level of work that you're trying to put out?
Yeah, we've been fortunate. We have a good base of trade partners that we work with. We're always trying to expand that. We definitely felt the pinch during COVID when everybody's business was booming. There was definitely some schedule lag when that was happening. But I don't see any trade partner red flags in our area right now as far as us being able to perform work. That doesn't seem to be an issue in our area.
And even finding project managers for you to do the work. I know that's something that a lot of people struggle with, being able to find someone who has enough construction background plus even just the desire to manage people.
Yeah, I think we're gonna get there pretty quickly. I think we're gonna need a project manager, I think, within the next 12 to 18 months. And so right now we're actively looking for lead carpenters. We're gonna put a level of lead carpenters below each of our project managers, and we are seeing that challenge on that lead carpenter side. We've got a couple leads that I think are going to work well for us, but yeah, I do think in that area, like hiring in-house for those skilled laborers has proven to be challenging as far as finding candidates.
Was there anything in particular that made you start to think about putting another layer underneath the project managers?
I think it was just having a little bit more control, and also with our growth over the last couple of years, we've realized that we can perform more volume with the existing project managers we have if we can free them up from having tool belts on or being stuck at a project more than they need to. So if we have somebody that can float and oversee a project while that project manager goes to project number 2 or 3, they don't have to worry about things falling behind somewhere. So we felt like it would be a good add to be able to have those people on staff, and they can take the place of some of our trade partners if, in fact, they do, our trade partners are too busy to come perform interior trim, So just a little bit more flexibility and control over our schedules, I think, is the motivation.
And it gets to a point where you struggle to manage teams that get really big. If you're trying to manage a lot of project managers who are then managing a lot of projects, sometimes that extra layer can just kind of break those teams up a little bit and make them easier to manage on your behalf.
That's absolutely correct. Yeah. So we're hopeful that, we see some good scale from this, that we'll be able to, do some more volume. And then also, just in general, it's going to be good for our project managers to not have them, constantly looking at all the details. They can just kind of step back a little bit and look at bigger picture things on their projects versus being down in the details. So hopefully a lead carpenter can kind of perform those detailed tasks for them.
So have you done any work to your own house now that you're in the business?
Yeah, it's funny. Absolutely. This house that I'm in right now, we bought in August of 2021, and it was a home built in 1951, had never been touched, and we basically have replaced every mechanical, electrical, plumbing material in this house, additions and renovations, and it was a big move for us. So this is the first house I did when I was with Alloy, and basically acted as a general contractor with a lot of help from people at the office. And it was an awesome learning experience. It's like, some learnings were more expensive than others. And, but yeah, it was actually enjoyed it a lot. Glad we're kind of past it, because it was just a big thing to take on while you're trying to work full time as well. But, we touched everything in this house, basically.
Is that something you could have ever conceived of doing without having had this position at a company that does it?
Yeah, that's how I landed in this position. We had this goal, my wife and I, starting back in 2015. We were in a neighborhood we had lived in for 12 years, and we were ready to get into a more social neighborhood in the downtown area. And we decided that we were going to try and buy like the worst house in the nice neighborhood that we liked and fix it and live in it. And then, try and do 2, 3, 4 of those over a 10-year period. And this is our 4th one in 8 years. Wow. And we're done. No more. We've had enough. But as we went through that process, I just loved watching these houses become our homes and watching them transform from what everybody thought was just an ugly house and to this, wow, this is an amazing house. You guys are doing a great job. And so we did 3 of those before I started working at Alloy. And I knew I wanted to be in this space. I just never thought I would be, because it's just uncommon for somebody outside the industry to get in. But, it's just a credit to Zach and Dan at Alloy that they, could think outside the box, and they knew that my skill set would translate. It was just going to take a little bit of training, to get me there. So super appreciative of their, time in getting me here. And it's just been an awesome change for me. So work is definitely so much more fun now because I really enjoy being in this space.
Dan, it's been great having you on. Is there anything else that you want to tell our audience before we go?
No, I can't really think of anything. Just get out there and enjoy what you do. It's great to be in this space.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting story that you did 3 of those and then liked it enough to become part of the industry. I think that says something, that when it's something that you're doing for fun or doing because it's pastime is the wrong word, but you're doing it to do it as a side thing that makes a better life for you. And then here you are doing it for other people.
Yeah, it's been great.
Well, Dan, thanks for taking the time to join me today. And thanks to everybody for listening. Please remember to send us your comments, questions, and suggestions to FHBpodcast@taunton.com. Please like, comment, or review us wherever you're listening. It helps others find our podcast. Thanks again to Dan, and thanks to you for listening.